We're going to begin our study of statistics, Math 1342, with a lot of vocabulary. And in chapter 1. And I've typed it out. So there's no confusion of what I want you to know. So here we go. The section 1.1, the title is Statistical and Critical Thinking. Both are what statistics are. Here's the study, and here's a analysis, conclusion. Now, we don't say conclusion in statistics. We say inference in most cases. In other words, definitively, if we're doing samples, which is what statistics is, if we do a sample, it should reflect the population, but the population changes with time. So let's look at what we're going to be doing. The process involved in conducting a statistical study consists of prepare, analyze, and conclude. Statistical thinking involves a critical thinking and the ability to make sense of results. And that means tendencies of the data studied. That's what that means. Statistical thinking demands so much more than the ability to execute complicated calculations. So, and the reason we have that is because we always have programs that facilitate that aspect. So let's go. Let's see what this vocabulary is going to be. So we have some here. And you can see that the collection of observations, such as measurements of gender or survey responses, is data. Plural. Data is plural. Statistics. Well, now we're at the crux of what we're studying, is the science of planning studies and experiments, obtaining data, and organizing, summarizing, presenting, analyzing, and interpreting those data, and then drawing conclusions based on them. Population is going to be something that pops up almost in every section. So population is the complete collection of all measurements or data that are being considered. Typically, a population is the complete, and that's critical, complete collection of data that we make an inference about. Here's the introduction of the word inference. It's not a conclusion per se, it is a determination of trend. So a census is the collection of data from every member of the population. So these two guys are related. And these two guys are related, although data is related to all of them. A sample is a subcollection of members selected from the population. Statistics sample population parameter. And we'll talk about that later. So let's do an example. In doing examples, we can then determine if it is a population or if it is a sample. All right, and there's some keys to this. All right, it says reported versus measured. That's a context of what we're studying right here. In a survey of 1,046 adults concluded by Bradley Corporation, subjects were asked how often they wash their hands when using a public restroom. And 70% of the respondents said always. Well, that's pretty good, you would think. Now, later, as we study things of how we collect data, that will come into issue. So it asks, identify the sample. All right. The sample is a specific quantity. So the 1,046 adults is our sample, the one we're using to make a determination. Then it wants the population. Well, the population must be what's not spoken of, all adults. Who wash their hands after public restrooms. So that gives you an idea of the simplicity that's so important. So here we go. Why would better results be obtained by observing the hand washing instead of asking about it? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? When asked the question, truth or lie can occur. When observing, actions, sound data is collected. Okay, nothing hard, makes common sense. We think about how we observe rather than assume, okay, because we take people at their word if we know them well. Well, if you're doing a study, you don't know them well. So let's talk about what we mentioned earlier, and that was some of the items to make the study of statistics a uniform approach. Okay, so we talk about the context, and this means the basis of the study. That means we have to start with either a question or inquiry, question or study. And then we have to decide about what takes place when we do this. let me make some room because I didn't think clearly. So in the question or inquiry, we have to have a goal. Usually the answer or the idea of what we think should happen. And also too, we have to have a source of collecting the data. So those are two criterias under the question or inquiry. Then we must have our data representation. And our data says uh, if population or sample, and the logistics of getting it. Oh, to study. All right. And the goal of the study is the result. Your instructor could spell, it would be a real nice thing. So let's look at the source of data. All right. The source is the quantity if a sample, we're wanting a statistic rather than the population, which is the parameter. The quantity of the sample, if wanting a statistic, the representation of the population, if it's a sample, and the process of gathering. To collect the data. All right. Now, this is if we're doing a statistic. If it's a population, meaning all of the subject matter, then it's more involved. To do something like all males or all females or married couples. I mean, that would be an astronomical problem. So we talk now about sampling methods. And we're talking about the most ordinary one and the one that causes us concern the most. And that's the voluntary response. Um, and notice that in our textbook, it talks about it being a self-select sample. That means people can choose, respondents, I should say. Respondents can choose to participate. in a survey or study. And there's a lot of loopholes on this one. Again, we covered it in that first example we did. And then this is the first one we're studying. We get more in depth as we get into section 1.3, but we're talking first, let's get our feet wet. And the most common one is a voluntary response. You see them all the time when you see a doctor or you buy an item. Or buy an item or eat at a restaurant. And they want you to rate the service. Well, I read a lot on my Kindle, and they always want me to rate the book. Well, my taste is different than your taste. So it is difficult to figure out how confident that rate is, and if I was being honest. All right, and the last thing we do is graph the data or explore the data. This is when we make conclusive inferences about what the data is saying regarding the initial question. So here we go. Now we're talking about that same analysis as to two types. Two types. Um, the two types of analysis are statistical significance and practical significance. This has to do with what you feel applies to you. And and but in statistics, we make the determination by criteria. And I got this from the textbook to make sure I don't sway you one way or the other. Statistical significance is achieved in a study when we get the result that is very unlikely to occur by chance. In other words, it is going to happen. Okay. When it says it's very unlikely to occur with chance, by chance, means that in repeated studies of samples, we get the same results. Meaning that whatever the study was and the sample they took, it does relatively represent the population. Okay, a common criterion is that we have a statistical significance if the likelihood of an event occurring by chance is 5% or less. Okay, let's think about that. So if we're talking 5%, right? So if this is 0%, 50%, 100%. Okay, now this is not going to happen. Chance, half. So it's saying, so let's do 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. So 5% is right here. There is at is 5% or less by chance. So that all the data is challenged, and there's less likelihood of that occurring. All right. Okay. Practical significance. Now, practical. Think about that word. Practical means everyday use, right? It is like putting on a blue shirt versus a red shirt. Practical because you're wearing tan pants. Okay. It is possible that some treatment or finding is effective. That means it works. But common sense might suggest that the treatment or findings does not have enough of a difference to justify its use. Now let's discuss that. It means that, but there's a slight considering the general outcome without some treatment. Now, I've always been challenged about my weight. So I'm always looking for some form of losing weight. And you see the commercials all the time about Slim Fast and Nutrisystem and all of these concepts. And what they do is control the intake of calories. And oftentimes they don't consider the other parts of your well being. So they might show some effect if it's used exactly like they're doing it. But for a human being to stay strictly on that was difficult. You might recall Oprah Winfrey lost something like 100 pounds on uh, this particular diet that she was on, and she confessed that when she traveled to Hawaii for a seminar or a presentation or whatever she was doing, she binged on a hamburger and fries because she had neglected that aspect of enjoyment of food. And then she gained back that weight once she dropped the program. So the maintenance was not effective. So these kinds of things means there might be some practical significance, uh, but uh, with controlling your intake of calories is the better deal. Now I'm wrestling with that every day of my life because I love sweet. So there's my problem, right? Okay. Now you have an idea of the difference between statistical significance, means that it can't happen by chance, and the practical significance, meaning that it does show it works slightly and it has to be maintained, but the overall inference is on self-control. All right, so let's look at this example. Here we go. We're ready? Now remember, you can, I will stop right there and we'll start with that one on the next video. Thank you for listening.